Hello guys, and welcome to this video about the top 50 Tableau interview questions and answers. Throughout this video, I'm going to talk about the most asked questions about Tableau, and we are going to give a detailed answer about each question. So the first question is, what is Tableau? Tableau is the most powerful, secure, and flexible end-to-end analytics platform. As we will see later on, Tableau has some features that we cannot find in other business intelligence tools. So Tableau is the best business intelligence tool, and it is used for data visualization and data analysis. Tableau users can retrieve data from all sources, since we can connect to CSV file, an Excel file, we can connect to Hadoop, we can connect to AWS, Google Cloud, etc. And it allows to work with a huge amount of data, which means big data. And as I said, Tableau makes it so easy to work with very complex data sets, since it has a feature which is called drag and drop, and also works with a very high speed, which will allow you to retrieve millions to billions of rows. The second question is, how can you define data visualization? Well, data visualization is the representation of data in the form of plots, graphs, and charts, like for example, line chart, bar chart, a histogram, etc. We can use data visualization for exploratory data analysis, which means that through the data analysis process, or we can use it to represent findings and results of a given task. Data visualization allows to explain very complex data sets in a very simple way. For example, you can explain an issue of a given project using some charts or some graphs. As I said, also the findings or the results can be represented in the form of data visualization, etc. Then we have, what are the different products that Tableau offers? We have mainly 5 types of products. We have Tableau Desktop, which we will download on our computer. We have the Tableau Server, which is kind of shared platform for Tableau users, which is mostly used within companies. We have Tableau Cloud, we have Tableau Prep for data preparation, and we have Tableau Public. Tableau Public is generally used to publish some works of people who made very interesting dashboard. Then we have, what are the different data connections in Tableau? So in Tableau, we have 2 types of connections. We have the live connection, which means reading and retrieving data directly from the data source, which means that we will have real-time data updates. For example, if the file is huge, modifications may take time, which results in a low performance. Because when you are in live connection and you want, for example, to refresh your data, the whole data in the data source will be refreshed. Which means that, for example, if you have 1 billion rows, everything will be refreshed, and this may take a lot of time. This is why Tableau has defined this second type of data connections, which are data extracts. Data extracts can be part or the whole data set, which is created from the live connection data source, and it is used offline. So you can create this part of data, or you can take the whole data set and use it offline. So when you will work with these extracts, you will increase the performance and work in a more dynamic way. Also, updates can be done manually at any time or can be scheduled. For example, if you want to add some new rows, you can just update it manually, or you can schedule it, for example, every day or every week, depending on your project. And generally, extracts are saved in Tableau Server. Then we have, what is Tableau Data Engine? So the data engine Tableau is used when creating, refreshing, or querying extracts. So mainly it is used for managing extracts. So the sixth question is, what are the different Tableau files types? We have workbooks, bookmarks, packaged workbooks, extracts, data sources, packaged data sources. As you can see here, each file has its own extension. And for example, for workbooks we have TWB, bookmarks we have TBM, packaged workbooks we have TWBX, extracts can be TDE or hyper, data source TDS, and packaged data source TDSX. Then we have, what is the difference between TWB and TWBX file extensions. For the first one, which is files with TWB, they are the Tableau workbooks. And workbooks hold 1 or more worksheets plus 0 or more dashboards and stories, which means that workbooks do not contain any data. Whereas for the files with TWBX file extension, which are the Tableau packaged workbooks, they can be defined as a single zip file that contains workbook along with any supporting local file and background images, which means that This format is the best way to package your work for sharing with others who don't have access to the original data. So files with twbx file extension, they have both the data visualization and the data that is used for this analysis. So if you want to share your work, it is better to save it as a packaged workbook so that you will have everything that is necessary for your work. Then we have what are the characteristics of TDS files. So as we have said, Tableau data source files have the TDS file extension. So data source files are shortcuts for quickly connecting to the original data that you use often, and data source files do not contain the actual data, but rather the information necessary to connect to the actual data, as well as any modifications you have made on top of the actual data, such as changing default properties, creating calculated fields, adding groups, and so on. So the TDS files, they will help you to connect quickly to the original data. Then we have what are the characteristics of TDE files. So depending on the version the extract was created, so as we have said, extracts have TDE extension or hyper extension. So extract files are a local copy of a subset or entire data set that you can use to share data with others when you need to work offline and improve performance. As we have said, when we have defined the connections of Tableau, so data extracts help improve performance and work offline. The 10th question is what are the data types in Tableau? So in Tableau, we have 6 types. We have numerical values. As you can see here, they can be decimal or whole numbers. We have date and time values, which means that we will have the date and the time with hours, minutes, and seconds. Then we have date values, only the year, the month, and the day. We have string values, Boolean values, which can be true or false, and we have geographical values. So the geographical role can be, for example, a country, a continent, city, a region, etc. Then we have what are dimensions and measures in Tableau. So first, dimensions contain qualitative values. For example, they can be cities, regions, categories, segments, etc. And as you can see here, when we want to use a measure for a dimension, we have only 4 types. We have either the minimum, the maximum, the count, or the count distinct. Whereas for the measures, they contain quantitative values. For example, profit, sales, quantities, etc. And as you can see here, when we want to measure, we have the aggregation functions, the sum, the average, the median, the count, and the count distinct. And we have also the minimum, the maximum, the percentile, standard deviation, variance, etc. Then we have what is the difference between measure names and measure values. So measure names basically is a dimension and includes the names of all measures in the dataset, whereas the measure values section contains the values of the measures. The 13th question is how can you explain discrete and continuous variables in Tableau? So continuous, which means forming an unbroken whole without interruption, and continuous fields are in green color. So if you see the fields in green color, it means that are continuous, and also both the measures and the dimensions can be continuous. Whereas for discrete, they are individually separated and distinct, and they are presented in blue color, and also both measures and dimensions can be discrete. As you can see here, the discrete measure is presented in blue. We have sum of sales. The discrete dimension is presented in also blue, for example, city. Continuous measure sum of sales, it is represented in green. And the continuous dimension, we have the year, and it is represented in green. So this is just to distinguish between discrete values and continuous values from the colors. And as we have said, both the measures and the dimensions can be both discrete or continuous. How can you define a worksheet in Tableau? As defined by Tableau, worksheet contains a single view, along with shelves, cards, legends, and the data and analytics panes in its sidebar. And the worksheets, they are used to create the different visualizations that will be combined in a dashboard or used in a story. For example, in a worksheet, you can create line chart, an area chart, stacked bar chart, tree map, a heat map, etc. As you can see here in this image, we have the logo that we will use in Tableau to create a new worksheet. So generally, you will be given choices to choose which symbol is used to create a worksheet dashboard on your story. So this is the symbol or the logo to create new worksheet in Tableau. And here we have an example of a worksheet. So in the left we have data and analytics. Then we have the pages shelf, we have filter shelf, we have marks card, and we have also the columns and the row shelves. And in the right we have the different filters that we'll use, and we have the legend. In this case it is the sum of zone cells, which is a gradient. Okay, so this is an example of a worksheet. Then we have how can you define a dashboard in Tableau. So basically a dashboard is a collection of worksheets with different data visualizations and tables that you can use simultaneously for your data analysis. For example, as we have said, worksheet is for a single view, and if you have more than, for example, 5 or 6 fields that you want to analyze and see the relationship between these fields simultaneously, so you are going to create several views from several worksheets, then you will combine all these worksheets in a dashboard. And here in this image we have the symbol or the logo to create a new dashboard. Here we have a dashboard example. For example, here we have Netflix movies, and we want to see the relationship between the different countries, the genre, the total movies, total TV shows by years. We have the ratings, we have the movies and TV shows distribution. So for each movie we have the release year, the rating, the description, the type, the title, etc. So this is kind of dashboard that you will need for your analysis to see the relationship between the different charts and views created from worksheets. Next question is, what are the different objects that we can find in a dashboard? So when you create a new dashboard, in the left you will see the different objects, and we have 11 objects, and this object can be tiled or floating. But we have the horizontal, vertical, you can add text, you can add image, you can add the web page, data story, blank, something empty that you will fill later on, navigation, download extension, and ask data. So these are the different objects that you will find in your dashboard. Then we have what is the difference between tile and floating. So simply floating objects can be overlapped and one can be layered over the other objects. So this means that it's up to you to change the size of your object. Okay, so you can change the size, you can change the height, you can change the width, right? Whereas for the tile objects, they do not overlap and they fit together to fill the space in the dashboard. So you cannot change the size manually, or you cannot, for example, have one view or one graph on another. Okay, so this is the main difference between floating and tile objects. And of course, they are used when creating dashboards, since it is a dashboard that allows several data visualizations and several views. The next question is, how can you define a story in Tableau? So by definition, a story is a sequence of data visualizations to explain a given analysis step by step. For example, if you want to explain, for example, something that happened year after year, you can use either dashboard or worksheet. So you cannot use the dashboard and the worksheet simultaneously in story. So either a dashboard or a worksheet. And these worksheets or dashboards, they can be used in a sequence so that you can explain a phenomenon. And also we have here the logo in Tableau that is used to create a new story. Then we have, how can you define workbook in Tableau? So basically, workbook contains all the sheets that are used for data visualization and data analysis in Tableau. They can be worksheets, dashboards, or stories. For the 20th question, we have, how can you schedule a workbook after publication on Tableau Server? So in Tableau Desktop, you select Server, Publish Workbook. Then in the Publish Workbook to Tableau Server dialog box, click Schedules and Authentication, and under Extract Schedule, select the schedule from the list. And as we have said previously, schedules can be, for example, daily or weekly, or for example, you can do it manually if you want. So it depends on your task. And this schedule, for example, it can be whole, for example, to refresh all the data source and add new rows, or you can add only the new rows. So it will depend on your task. Next, we have the different filters in Tableau. As we can see here, we have 6 types. We have extract filters that are used when creating extracts, data source filters, which directly filter from the data source. We have context filters. Generally, when working with sets, for example, if you want to create top 10 customers in a given city depending on a condition, you are going to use context filters. We have dimension filters for include and exclude LOD, where LOD stands for level of detail. We have measure filters, which are used for table calculations, clusters, etc. And finally, we have user filters. So the user filters, they are used when working with reference lines and trend lines. The next question is, can you explain the use of context filters in Tableau? So context filters can be used to improve performance, and they are also used when creating a top N filter. As I said, for example, if you want to create top 10 customers depending on a given condition, you are going to use context filters. Next, we have what do we mean by parameters in Tableau. So by definition, a parameter is a workbook variable such as a number, date, or string that can replace a constant value in calculation, filter, or reference line. Where can we use parameters in Tableau? Parameters mainly are used in 4 different situations. We have reference lines, for example, which can be a horizontal or a vertical reference line. We have actions, we have filters, and calculated fields. Next, we have what is the difference between parameters and filters. So parameters are independent of the data source, whereas filters are dependent, which means that by default parameters can be used with all worksheets within the same workbook since they don't depend on the data source, whereas filters they cannot because they depend on the data source. Nevertheless, for example, if the same filter is used in several worksheets, we can choose to apply filters to the other worksheets manually. So we can choose to apply a given filter to a number of worksheets in the same workbook. Finally, we have parameters can be used within calculated fields, whereas filters are applied directly to a dimension or measure. So as we have said, when creating a calculated field, we can use a parameter within this calculated field, whereas a filter is applied directly to the dimension or the measure in the view. Next we have what are the different joins in Tableau. So mainly we have 4 types. We have the inner join when we want to combine tables, and as it is defined, the result is a table that contains values that have matches in both tables. So if there are matches, we will get results. If the value doesn't match across both tables, it is dropped entirely. The left join, it contains all the values from the left table and the corresponding matches from the right table. And here, when a value in the left table doesn't have a corresponding match in the right table, we will have null values in the data grid. Same thing for the right, so we will retrieve all the rows from the right table and the matches from the left table. If a value in the right table doesn't have corresponding match in the left table, we will have null values in the data grid. And we have the full outer, which returns a table that contains all values from both tables. Here, Tableau by definition added union. So as we can see here, union is not a type of join, but it is used to combine 2 or more tables by appending rows of data from one table to another. So here it will append rows from one table to another, and the condition is that these tables need to have the same rows and the same data types. So the next question is how many table joins are possible in Tableau, and we can see here that the maximum number of tables that can be joined in Tableau is 32. So we can join up to 32 tables in Tableau. Then we have what is the difference between joining and blending. So by definition, the main difference between joining and blending is when the aggregation is performed. For the join, combines the data and then aggregates, whereas for a blend, it aggregates and then combines the data. So the main difference is when the aggregation is performed. So data blending is a method for combining data from multiple sources, and generally joins are used when combining data from different tables in the same data source. So for example, if we have several tables in the same data source, generally we use joins. But the only situation where we have to use blending is if we want to combine data from published data sources. For example, if we publish our data sources on Tableau Server, then we cannot use joins. In this case, we have to use blending. Okay, so this is the only situation where we have to use blending over joins, because joins cannot be used to combine published data sources. Next, we have how can you define data modeling in Tableau. So as defined by Tableau, data model is a diagram that tells Tableau how it should query data in the connected database tables. And as you can see, for example, data model can be simple for only one table, or it can be complex with multiple tables that use different combinations of relationships, joins, and unions. And as you can see here in this image, we have joins between orders and people, and we have also another join between orders and returns. So data model can have one table, for example, only orders, or a relationship between orders and people, or a union between different tables, and also, as you can see here in this image, we have the joins. Next, we have what is a calculated field and how to use it. So by definition, calculated fields allow to create new data from data that already exist in the data source. And when created in calculated field, a new field or column in the data source will be created, and the values or members of which are determined by calculation that can be controlled. Calculated fields can be used for many reasons, like segmenting data, converting a data type of a field, such as converting a string to a date, for example, aggregating data, featuring results, calculating ratios, etc. Next, we have how can you create a calculated field. So you go to Analysis and select Create Calculated Field. The following window will appear where you can choose a name. So where it is written Calculation 1, you select your name, and in the window you select your formula, or you write your formula. You click on OK, so a new dimension or measure will be created, and if you want to use that calculated field, you can drag and drop it to the worksheet as the remaining dimensions and measures. What is the difference between groups and sets in Tableau? So groups are used to combine related members in the same field to result in a new dimension. So if you have a field and you have several values and you want to combine or create different groups in this field, so you use groups. And groups are static. For example, grouping the states in a country into regions like East regions, regions in the West, regions in the South, and regions in the North. Whereas sets are custom fields that define a subset of data based on some conditions. So here, to create a set, we need conditions. For example, we want to create the top 10 cities based on a given condition. And sets can be static or dynamic, whereas for the groups, they are static. What is the difference between aggregation and disaggregation? So aggregation refers to the process of summarizing data by using aggregation functions, like the sum, the average, etc. Whereas for disaggregation is the process of displaying each row by itself, and by that, the view shows a mark for every row in the data source. How can you define level of detail? LOD. So the level of detail of the view determines the number of marks in the view. And we have three types. We can either include these values, we can exclude them, or we can create fixed LOD. What are shelves in Tableau? Shelves are used to build the structure of the visualization, increase the level of detail, and control the number of marks in the view by including or excluding data. And we have mainly four kinds of shelves. So we can put our fields in columns, rows, pages, and filters. Next, we have what is the difference between TreeMaps and HeatMaps. As you can see here in this image, we have a tree map that shows top 10 publishers by sales. So tree maps are used to display data in nested rectangles. Dimensions are used to define the structure of the tree map, and measures to define the size or color of the individual rectangles. So here we have our dimensions and we have the measures. So we have the quantity, which defines the color and the size of the rectangle. The higher is the size, the bigger is the value, and the darker is the color. Whereas for heat maps, they are used to visualize marks on the view using colors. As you can see here in this heat map, So we have the higher is the value, the darker is the color. For example, the maximum value is 46. Heat maps are also like highlight tables. So both require at least one dimension, but heat maps can be created with one or two measures, whereas a highlight table is created with one measure. What is dual axis in Tableau and where can you use it? So dual axis is useful in data visualization for analyzing two measures that have different scales. For example, as you can see here in this image, we have in the left we have the sales, in the right we have the profit, and as you can see we don't have the same scale. So for profit, for example, we have negative values, whereas for the sales we don't have negative values. Sales are presented in orange and profit is presented in blue. So here we use the dual axis to analyze two different measures, which are the sales and the profit, which are defined one in the right and one in the left. What do you mean by a blended axis in Tableau? So contrary to dual axis, blended axis is used to blend two measures that share an axis when they have the same scale. For example, here we have the quantity and count of orders. So in this case, we have the same scale and we use blended axis. Whereas if we do have different scales, we are going to use the dual axis. Okay. Next, we have how to deal with null values in Tableau. So sometimes when we drag and drop a field into our view, into the worksheet, sometimes we get null values. As you can see here in this image, we have 49 unknown. So in order to deal with these null values, we click on 49 unknown and the following window will appear. It will say to us that there are 49 values that have unknown geographic locations. What do you want to do? So we have three different possibilities. We can either edit locations, so correct the unknown locations, filter data, for example, we can exclude these unknown values, or show data at default position, show the special values at the default position on the axis. For example, null values are shown at 0. So you have three possibilities when you have null values in Tableau. You can either edit manually, so you add your data manually. You can filter your data, for example, you can exclude these values, or you can use the default position. Okay. Next, we have what is the use of marks card. So as you can see here, in the marks card, we have 5 different things. So we have the color, we have the size, we have the label, the detail, and tooltip. And also, we have a list to choose the different data visualization that we want to display in our view. For example, it can be a density, it can be square, it can be a line, it can be automatic. Okay, so it depends on your task. As you can see here, marks cards are very important because it will allow us to manage our visualization, our colors, and also control our visualization. Next, we have what is an area chart. So an area chart is like a line chart, but the area between the line and the axis is filled with a color depending on the fields used. It can also be defined as a combination of line chart and bar chart. As you can see here in this image, we have sales by year and genre. So we have the colors of the area charts depend on the different genres. And generally, area charts are used to visualize time series data. Next, we have how can you define a histogram. So a histogram is a graph that represents a distribution of continuous quantitative variable. For example, in this image, you can see the different bins of age and the count of each bin. And in Tableau, only one measure is required to create a histogram. How can you define a bullet graph? Bullet graph is a variation of a bar graph developed to replace dashboard, gauges, and meters. A bullet graph is useful for comparing the performance of a primary measure to one or more measures. For example, you have one primary measure and we have the secondary measure, then you want to compare between these two measures, then you will use a bullet graph. How can you define a stacked bar chart? As you can see here in this image, we have the different sales in each month. And as you can see, for each month, we have a bar. And this bar is divided into different categories or into different segments. And as you can see in the legend, each color represents a region. So a stacked bar is a type of bar chart where values are represented in the form of segmented bars. Next, we have what is the use of Show Me icon in the Tableau worksheet. So when we drop measures and dimensions into rows and columns, you will have all the possible graphs and charts or even tables that you can create using these fields. So the Show Me icon contains all the suggested and possible graphs and charts that can be created based on the fields used in the worksheet. How can you improve the performance in Tableau? So in order to improve performance in Tableau, we have so many possibilities, and everyone depends on the task and the project. For example, you can use data extracts. We can reduce the number of fields using the hidden option. We can delete all unused worksheets, delete unnecessary calculation fields, remove unnecessary visualizations in the dashboard. If applicable, use the same filter for the maximum number of worksheets and do not create the same filter over and over. And finally, we have reduced the number of marks on the view. Next question is, what are table calculations in Tableau? So as you can see here, we have the list of the quick table calculation. For example, we have running total, difference, percent of total, rank, percentile, moving average, YTD total, compound growth rate, year-over-year growth. What is the difference between dragging a discrete value to color in the marks card and dragging a continuous value? The first example is dragging a discrete value. So when we drag a discrete value to color, it creates distinct colors for each item. As you can see here in this image, for segment, we have three different categories. We have consumer represented in blue, corporate represented in orange, and home office represented in red. Whereas if we drag a continuous value to color, it will create a gradient. As you can see here in this image, when we drop profit, which is a continuous value, it will create a gradient which starts from the minimum value up to the maximum value. What is the default duration of animations in Tableau? So by default, animations in Tableau takes 0.3 seconds. Finally, we have what do we mean by metadata in Tableau. Metadata can be defined as data that provide information about other data. So as we know, data can come in different formats and structures, categorized at varying levels of detail, and can have relationships with other data. So this is the kind of metadata that we can find in Tableau. So that's it for this video. I hope that you have learned new things, and good luck for the interview.